It is a tune that hasn't changed much over the past few years, and one that has actually increased in tempo as we've neared the 70th anniversary of World War II. Japan must admit wrongdoing and apologize for its actions during the war. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says he will stand by previous apologies and express remorse in his address marking the end of the great conflict that consumed the world in the 1940s. But will what the Prime Minister says be enough, and what can be expected from Japan as it moves to play a larger role in Asia? To answer that, I spoke with Franz-Stefan Gady, Senior Fellow at the EastWest Institute. I started off our conversation by asking him, given that the LDP has come out and said that past apologies for the comfort women were a mistake, will we see Abe make an apology for that and, to a larger extent, the war?
Well, first of all, I have no doubt that Prime Minister Abe will apologize in one way or the other for Japan's misdeeds during the Second World War. However, the United States, South Korea, and China, and perhaps more importantly, the Japanese people, will pay particular close attention to how Prime Minister Abe will phrase this apology. And the widely known 1995 Murayama statement released by then Prime Minister of Japan, Tomichi Murayama, to mark the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, spoke of deep remorse and heartfelt apology for Japan's aggression during the 1930s and 1940s. And then in 2005, Prime Minister Koizumi also included these phrases in his statement on the war. And the words aggression and remorse will be hugely important for China and South Korea, given Japan's action during the Second World War in both countries. So I think the Murayama statement is the benchmark that Shinzo Abe will have to live up to this week. And he has been sending mixed signals, and that's, I think, where the problem starts. So on the one hand, Abe said that he may not feel obliged to merely repeat the Murayama statement. And on the other hand, he did say on one occasion he would inherit the text, in fact, in its entirety. So if I could guess, I would probably say that yes, we will find some remorse, the words of remorse and aggression in his remarks. Why do I say that? I think that's where the United States comes in, because the United States' main concern here is that whatever Abe says should not further undermine South Korea-Japan relations, America's two staunchest allies in the region. And I believe that policymakers in D.C. will pay very close attention to whether Abe can be trusted as a partner by discarding his revisionism in favor of realism, and let Seoul and Tokyo move closer in the face of the growth of Chinese power in the region, which is the prism through which the United States sees the entire region. And lastly, I do think that the United States can be partially blamed for Abe's revisionist views, frankly.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, since we are talking about the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, I think one fact that is often neglected, or has been neglected in the last couple of weeks, is that the United States sanitized the true nature of Japanese war crimes during the Tokyo trials of Japanese war criminals in the late 1940s. For example, the United States chose to ignore Emperor Hirohito's knowledge and responsibility for his country's aggression. They chose to ignore the actions of the notorious Unit 731 on around 3,000 prisoners of war in Manchuria in China. They chose to ignore Japan's use of chemical warfare in China. And they chose to ignore the enslavement of tens of thousands of comfort women, most of them young South Koreans. And I think all of this immensely has complicated Japan's reckoning with its past to this day. So it is fair to say that the United States perhaps is partially, partially provided the cover behind which Japan's revisionists can hide when attacked. And Shinzo Abe, in that sense, is just the epitome, or the logical consequence of the alliance that has existed since the Cold War, since the 1950s, between Japanese conservatism and American military interests in the region.
Leading up to the anniversary, there were two definite camps with respect to historical issues. Abe and the LDP on, shall we say, the revisionist side, while scholars, former prime ministers, and even members of the imperial family on a more objective side. I want to ask you, where does the average Japanese citizen lean?
Well, of course, first of all, I think I would be very careful to make generalizations here, but I believe that for the most part, the average Japanese citizen is indifferent because history of the war does not feature as prominently in Japanese society as it still does in, for example, Germany. I remember reading a couple of weeks ago a recent poll that stated that only, I think, 17% of Japanese say that World War II is the most significant occurrence in modern bilateral ties between Japan and the United States, which I find absolutely astounding given the central role that the conflict played in shaping modern Japan.
Okay, one last question on this particular topic. When it comes to historical issues, South Korea and China typically call out Tokyo for its revisionist views, but we often don't hear things from ASEAN members. Why is that?
Well, I think that the experience in the Asian countries was a bit different from the Chinese and South Korean experience, since the Japanese aggression lasted a lot shorter in Southeast Asia. Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, that is Indonesia, and the Philippines were conquered in a period of roughly 4 months from late 1941 to the spring of 1942. And I would say it did not shape Southeast Asian national identities in a way that resistance to the Japanese helped legitimize the Communist Party in China, or how the experience of colonialism collectively shaped South Korea's identity. Also, the war in Southeast Asia was much more a war of the European colonial powers against Japanese aggression than a national uprising of those countries against the Japanese occupation. And then I think it's often neglected, but I feel it's important to point out that, in, for example, Indonesia, the Japanese in the first few weeks of their occupation promoted nationalist ideas. So Japan in Southeast Asia did, in one way or the other, facilitate the end of colonialism.
Switching gears here for just a moment, Abe and the LDP pushed through security bills that some say are unconstitutional. In your opinion, do these bills have any chance of standing, or will there be a challenge to determine their legal status?
Well, I think that's a very tricky question. Well, first of all, I think the proposed 11 security bills are obviously not consistent with the current understanding of the Constitution. And I would underline the word understanding here. I mean, otherwise there would be no need to reinterpret Article 9. And most constitutional scholars in Japan agree with that assessment, I believe. But as you probably know, Shinzo Abe's government does not need upper house approval to pass the national security legislation within the parliament, the Diet, since the much more powerful lower house can, with a 2/3 supermajority, override an upper house rejection. So should the LDP maintain discipline, and should it enjoy the full support of its coalition partner, Komeito, it can pass the legislation with no opposition support. And once that legislation passes, I don't think that the courts, given the history of reticence when it comes to this issue, will strike the bill down, or the bills down, as unconstitutional, which will make it a de facto amendment.
In some recent defense white papers, Japan has really painted China as an aggressor in the region. Now, with Japan increasing its presence not only in the South China Sea but also in the East China Sea, could we see the two nations bump heads?
Well, I think it has become increasingly clear, despite what we've seen in the last couple of weeks and months, that both the People's Republic of China and Japan are interested in some form of political detente. And I think we will see some signs of progress in the fall once all World War II commemorations are over, and once the debate surrounding Article 9 in Japan has subsided.
Franz-Stefan Gady with the EastWest Institute, thank you so much for your time this week.
Thank you.
You know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Japan 70 years after World War II. Is it time to let bygones be bygones and look to the future? Or does Tokyo still need to make amends for its aggression?